Good morning, everyone, from here in the East Coast. We welcome you all to today's webinar discussion on the topic Work Anywhere, ensuring superior digital experiences with synthetics and real user monitoring. I am Sid Kumar from the Exoprise marketing team and will be your host. Joining us from Forrester is our guest speaker, Andrew Hewitt. Andrew is a senior analyst serving infrastructure and operations professionals. His research focuses on helping companies improve the technology experience of their employees, especially in the area of digital workspace. Andrew, glad to have you here today.
Great to be here.
And
Thanks for having me.
And from Exoprise, we have our very own Jason Lieblich. Jason is the CEO and founder of the company with 20 plus years of experience in distributed systems management, networking, and security solutions.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining our webinar today.
Today's action-packed agenda includes an interactive discussion format around 6 questions and topics highlighted to the right. We'll be touching on the effects that the pandemic has had during and post on end user experience management, how work anywhere will most likely be a strategy going forward that IT must deal with, how businesses should optimize and benchmark SaaS performance, why RUM and synthetics are critical to IT, and finally, best practices to follow. Each speaker will share their perspective on the questions identified. We will finish up with a Q&A in the end, but feel free to submit your questions anytime during the session in the chat window. This presentation is being recorded and we will send the recorded link to you later. So with that, let's move to the first question of the day. How will EU-EM evolve post-COVID-19? Andrew, I want to start with you first, and then we'll have Jason join you afterwards and have this order.
Great. Thanks, Sid. And thanks, Jason and the whole Exoprise team for having me today. I'm so happy to be here talking about this really important topic. And what I want to start with here is a little bit of a look back on the last year. And it's, to be honest, it's a little surreal looking at this graphic. We put this out in April of 2020 to look at kind of the evolution of the pandemic. And you see that we identified basically 4 phases where we had that initial infection phase. We moved to the social distancing phase, which, lasted for quite a long time. Now we are in this management and really moving into this eradication phase as we start to increasingly get vaccinated across the world. Although the infection rates still tend to be very high, we are moving, making some progress, at least here in the United States, around the vaccine. And when I think about end user experience management in the context of this, we've seen this entire market around ensuring that the employee has a really great technology experience really change pretty dramatically throughout these different phases. So earlier on, I would say in the social distancing phase, in that first transition to work from home, we saw a lot of these experience management tools being used for basic, work from home setups. Do you have what you need? Do you have the right VPN connections? Do you have consistent access to your cloud applications? That sort of thing. And as we moved through the management phase, we started to see EUEM used in new ways, collecting information from users about their overall health and safety, opinions about the workplace, any additional technology needs that maybe were unmet. Around things like collaboration, for instance, tended to be one thing that came up. And so the overall usage of end user experience management has changed very dramatically over the last couple of phases that we've been going through. And we continue to see the evolution of how these tools are used. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. But I think it's clear if we move to the next slide here around priorities for end user experience management overall, there is a lot of momentum around using better data analytics technologies to improve employee experience. A whopping 64% of folks that we recently surveyed said that they are going to be investing in various data and analytics technologies to improve employee experience at their firms, particularly as technology is really the lifeline for employees in a remote work scenario. This idea that we need to have better understanding of what that experience is only getting more and more important. So not all of this is end user experience management. Some of it could be, other elements of data and analytics, could be just survey-based approaches as well. But a lot of it is end user experience management. We're also seeing a huge change around IT organizations and how they approach employee experience, even to the level of being directly goaled on improving that tech experience. So just over half of folks said that their technology teams and the individuals on those teams are explicitly goaled on providing the right technology to improve EX. So that's a big change. It's not just about the IT metrics anymore. It's about how do you drive that business outcome. A smaller number here, but 29% said they're actually collecting employee feedback to improve tech experience. That number has gone up year over year. Pretty consistently for the past couple of years. And, this it seems like an obvious thing. You would go and collect feedback around the technology experience. Well, it's not something that's very deeply ingrained in a lot of IT organizations, but we are starting to see that shift. And what's really made this a lot easier is that many of the experience management tools are either, providing a qualitative feedback mechanism, relying on crowdsourcing capabilities. I think we're going to talk a little bit later about crowdsourcing to really provide a little bit more context for that end user. And specifically, the most recent data that we pulled showed that just about a quarter of organizations indicate they're going to invest specifically in end user experience management tools in the next 12 months. That's on top of the already fairly high adoption, which I believe is in the 40 percentile range right now. So there's a lot of movement here amongst technology leaders to really start looking at that technology experience of employees and investing in tools, investing in new processes, et cetera. And so this has evolved quite a bit. If we go to the next slide here, we're seeing a lot of momentum around a couple of key areas of investment for end user experience management. So this is a little bit of a look into the future. Not every tool out there is going to have these capabilities, but definitely things that we're hearing about more consistently from our clients is one, the role of AI and ML-based predictive analysis, right? Getting away from being super reactive to issues happening in a technology environment and instead being able to look at various signals that are happening and be able to start predicting some of those outages and disruptions that are occurring. That's a lot of the direction that this industry is going in. And, there's some early success with across the industry, but this is still an area that is still developing. Broader employee engagement analysis. So one of the major strengths today in this space is around the telemetry collection, the actual data itself. We'll talk a little bit later about, looking specifically at SaaS applications and collecting that data and tracing that to outages and so forth. But one of the other areas that we are hearing about is what about the behavior of the end user? How do I start to measure things like adoption from the end user perspective, or looking at how they're using various technology tools? And that is that an indicator of satisfaction with that piece of technology? Are there areas that we could improve that? And so beginning to look more around the behavior of the user continues to be a trend that we are seeing out there today. True root cause analysis, understanding why a problem is happening. A lot of the solutions today will tell you where a problem is happening, but they won't tell you why it's happening. And so this idea of true root cause analysis, of being able to trace this from the endpoint through the application, through the ISP, all the way back to the cloud provider, and we'll show kind of a linear chain later on that kind of goes in depth on that, I think is a major area of investment for many of the vendors in this space, and a key criteria that you need if you really want to understand the key things that are holding back employee productivity in your organization from a tech perspective. Remote work experience monitoring, of course, we're going to see more and more of this. We saw a lot of things around VPN, home network diagnostics, things of that nature. I expect that we'll continue to see more targeted capabilities for looking at the remote work experience as well. This is a big topic of our discussion today, but the combination of both synthetic testing and real user monitoring capabilities, right? And we'll go into the difference between those two and why you need both of them. But a lot of the trend is toward real user monitoring and understanding what is that user actually experiencing in this moment in time, and how can we go and fix that for them as quickly as possible. So the combination of those two things is increasingly something we hear about from our clients, which, by the way, tend to be Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies. So these are larger enterprises that are looking at this. Although I do think that experience management it plays a role in basically every size of company, SMB down to the very smallest organizations as well. And increased support for mobile and LTE connectivity, especially as we move towards more of a hybrid workplace. I have some numbers I'll share on that as well. Just later on in the webinar, but this is basically what I'm seeing in the overall space of end user experience management. Jason, I'm curious, in your perspective, what are you seeing in this with regard to this question?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. In working with customers and companies and prospects prior to 2020, prior to the pandemic, the COVID times, and then into 2020, we just saw that there was an acceleration of all of these digital transformations. Some of this, a lot of this stuff was ongoing already. But then when the pandemic hit and, users moved to work from home and to work anywhere, all of these transformations just accelerated. IT was already shedding on-premise infrastructure. They were getting rid of Exchange servers and SharePoint servers and file servers, and they were rapidly adopting Office 365. And they were, the customers and IT and the users, the business units, were looking to shift to SaaS. They wanted the ability to upgrade things quicker. They wanted new tools, new applications faster. A little bit of it goes back to the sort of consumerization of IT. Everybody was getting better equipment at home. And they wanted to be able to get to these new things as fast as possible. So that forced the adoption of, SaaS tools, modern workplace technologies. And then once people moved home fully, for the hybrid work and the increased use of collaboration tools like Zoom and Teams, that accelerated the shift and the digital transformations, whether it's cloud proxies or SD-WANs or VPNs. So a lot of, there was just a huge shift, a rapid shift for IT, that got accelerated in 2020. And on the next slide, you can see that, this cuts across all of the different personas that, that IT, has, and that everybody that was involved in sort of managing these digital transformation shifts for their end users, whether it's application and service owners, the guys that decided to go to the cloud, the guys that decided to go to Office 365, they needed to understand how it was working for their end users, whether they were at HQ at the headquarters or at home. The help desk needed to understand, and be able to remotely troubleshoot, as you mentioned before. The network administrators got, maybe blamed for, poor VPN or proxy infrastructure. And the network administrators might have said, no, it's not us. It's the service providers or ISPs or the cloud providers that are having problems. The NOC and the operations personas, those teams, they needed to be aware in real time and ahead of time as to whether or not there were outages with respect to collaboration tools, file serving, sharing, SharePoint. They needed to understand how their end users were dealing with this remote work and being able to collaborate sufficiently now that everything had changed in 2020. And then also, VDI has taken off and remotely serving IT assets and IT applications from virtual desktops that are in the cloud. Being able to test and make sure that those are operating well from people's home networks, from people's VPNs, through all kinds of different technologies became, more and more critical in 2020, and will continue to as people, try to work anywhere. Next.
Thank you, gentlemen. The concept of work anywhere is spreading, but we are seeing roadblocks in delivering a great digital experience. Andrew, let's hear from you again.
So I think one of the major challenges with kind of traditional monitoring techniques is that they just, especially in a work anywhere scenario, they don't measure the experience where the user actually is. All of this data is not in your data center anymore. It's from, third-party cloud providers. It's, going through an ISP, a lot of the things that Jason just mentioned, right? And so, it's a bit, you're almost measuring the wrong thing, if you're not looking at the real user experience. And so, traditional monitoring as far as challenges, typically takes place on servers or maybe on a single website, right? And that's a portion of the end user experience, but it's not the entire thing. And so we'll talk in a little bit about how to be a little bit more holistic about the end user experience and really look at all the aspects of the tech experience, because they all impact each other. The real-time component as well tends to be a major gap here too. So a lot of companies will rely exclusively on a testing capability to really look at the end user experience. And testing is super important. We'll talk about that later, but it doesn't allow you to kind of engage the user in real time. There could be other external factors in there that testing isn't taking into account. And so understanding what this actual user experience is like is really important. So the traditional approach there needs a little bit of evolution in addition to make it super effective. It's often overly focused on IT metrics that frankly have limited or no relationship to employee satisfaction and the business outcome that you're trying to drive. If your goal is to improve digital experience, to enable people to be more productive, to enable them to be happier at work so that they stay at your company for a longer period of time, which there is a very strong correlation between all of those things that I just mentioned, then a traditional IT metric or SLA, like an MTTR, isn't going to give you that information. You need to have better metrics around what those business outcomes are and how are you delivering against those metrics. So there's a big rise today around the concept of the XLA, the experience level agreement, too, playing a major role for organizations. Limited view into third-party cloud services, ISPs, et cetera, right? A lot of the monitoring tools are designed for that older world where the enterprise owned a lot more of the technology that they gave to their users. And so in this world of, SaaS and, cloud providers and so forth, and people working from home, that's not necessarily the case anymore. So we need to evolve our approach to be more comprehensive of the fact that we don't own all of these technologies anymore. And often doesn't include qualitative feedback from employees, right? And that's a major gap today. It can bring you into that classic watermelon situation where all your metrics say you're green, but you're not seeing the red in the middle of the watermelon, which is all the negative user feedback. And so that's a major trend in the industry as well. But I would say that it's not just a tool problem as far as traditional monitoring techniques. It's also a process and people challenge about how do you organize around digital experience. And so on the next slide here, I just released a report on best practices for technology experience management. And we identified basically 5 major challenges, which are related to the technical capabilities, but are also related to how do you operationalize experience management in your organization? And so there are 5 things that we identified as major challenges. Prioritization, right? Where do I actually start? How do I know what's wrong? Organization, who does what, who owns what? And I love that slide that you had up just before this, Jason, around all these different owners of digital experience, right? You can get into a situation where it's not clear who owns the digital experience, and all of them play a role in ensuring that experience is a productive one for the end user. And so we're seeing a lot of organizations, do some things to better standardize their organizational approach to experience management. Technical debt, obviously, we'll be living with the legacy application debt until, probably the day we die. So it's something that's not going away anytime soon. But the question is, how do you approach it, both in terms of legacy technologies, but also skill sets? Adoption, which a lot of these end user experience management tools can help with, but really driving adoption of new technology services, that's part of the experience too. And then finally, continuous improvement. How do I keep innovating on this experience overall? So I would, as you start looking at your experience management strategy, look at it as a strategy, not necessarily as just a tool, right? It's the tool, which is the underlying, foundational component of it, but it's also how do you operationalize that in your organization? What processes do you change? What people do you put in charge? All of those sorts of things also play an incredibly important role in this as well. So Jason, over to you for the next one.
Sure. So I think, this question really focused or centered around, what are some of the challenges of delivering a great digital experience? And they've only gotten harder, when it comes to, cloud and SaaS and remote work from home. There's so many things that come together for an end user that IT has to deal with, whether it's, networking and security, proxies, single sign-on, cloud access security brokers, just to be able to get to, Salesforce or Office 365 or Concur or one of the other applications that might be delivered to end users, and they needed to be able to get to it wherever they were. These, all of these things come together, and it's, visibility was lost when either people went to, work from home, or when all the applications shifted to the cloud. Additionally, the benefits of going to the cloud, where everything is continuously upgraded, they can have pros and cons. If anybody's ever looked at like the Office 365 roadmap, it's just riddled with new releases, new changes, new UI stuff. So that and so that's both a pro and a con. People get upgraded applications, much faster, which was one of the problems when everything was on-prem. It was really difficult to upgrade all the time. And so now Microsoft is doing it for us, and they go fast, and they make lots of changes. They make lots of network changes. They make lots of application changes. They upgrade these things all the time. And IT often isn't aware of whether or not those upgrades cause problems. So it goes with that last bullet point there, employee expectations that things are fresh and new and upgraded all the time. There's pros and cons to that, in that you have to be aware of what's happening. Along with all these upgrades, comes just all the different access methods that are mentioned on this slide and on the next one, which is that, internet connectivity, the endpoints and the hops, remote troubleshooting, all of these factors go into the end user experience when it hits the desktop and how they interact with apps. And so this is really the problem challenge area, whether or not that user was at the headquarters on the local LAN, or remote on a laptop and roaming around, or working from home, how they access these applications, the context for, the performance of everything, and proactively monitoring and understanding whether or not there's good uptime and availability for these applications, especially as they change, is really, one of the things that we hear from customers is really challenging, with delivering a great user experience. And I think next.
All right, so moving on to the next question. Businesses are looking to optimize their monitoring strategy to ensure end user productivity. But how do we get there? Andrew?
So first of all, Jason, I think you hit the nail on the head there around the different access points, where people are accessing things, how they're accessing those applications. And it really goes back to, what is the business context of that person trying to do their work? So I completely agree with you here. Just to give a little perspective here on how we see the world evolving here at Forrester, we think that 30% of organizations are going to go back to the office, be kind of as normal again, as normal as we can be at least. 60% will be office plus an anywhere hybrid. So, basically a couple of days of in the office, a couple of days on home per week, and 10% will be mostly anywhere. And you see a couple of examples of companies that have announced their direction in different ways, what they're going to do. And there are definitely different benefits and drawbacks to each of these strategies here. But I bring this up as a way to say, think about the business context of the user and how this fits into your overall strategy as you think about how you improve their overall experience with with a monitoring tool, right? So, if you're going back to the office and you know that, a lot of that experience is not going to be, the roaming experience going around to different, coffee shops or the library or what have you, and then that's going to have a different impact on how you approach the monitoring. There might be things that might be more important for you in that scenario versus someone that is mostly anywhere, that's connecting via a bunch of disparate Wi-Fi connections at different places. If they're in that 10% category as well. So think about this not just as a monitoring tool, but also how does it fit into how do we think people are going to be working in the future? And so I just bring this up as one way to look at this. There's also other ways that you can look at this as well. You can look at it by roles, for instance. And so there's a lot of different ways to kind of think about your monitoring strategy in the context of how that user is being productive and how they're accessing those various applications. So on the next slide here, I did want to talk a little bit about how we at Forrester suggest that you think about optimizing end user experience management. And this is from a report called Transform Insights into a Better Employee Tech Experience. And we basically have outlined 5 major characteristics, if you will, around how organizations should approach this. One is that it should be holistic. Your experience management strategy should look across multiple different technologies, right? Devices, applications, whether they're on-prem, whether they're in the cloud, whether they're owned by you or not. It should look at network connectivity. Ideally, it should look at things like user authentication into various services as well. And so knowing that all these technologies at the end of the day impact someone's ability to be productive, you need to have better insight into all of these different categories, right? And some tools do, a lot of these. Some tools specialize in certain areas, and so there's different approaches for how you get to holistic. But at the end of the day, you do need to have visibility across the entirety of the experience. Workflow centric is also another component that we identify, and what we mean by that is really looking at what are the tasks that the user is trying to accomplish, and am I focused on that specifically? So an example of that is a large consulting organization that we've worked with, and their consultants are traveling folks, and they pretty much all use cloud-based SaaS applications, very heavy reliance on PowerPoint, as you can imagine. And so understanding the different workflows and tools that people really need to use to be productive is key to making sure that experience is really great. They're not out there using a bunch of CAD applications. So, understanding the performance of that is not useful for them. So think about the journey of that end user and how can you optimize your strategy for that. Feedback driven. So again, it gets to that watermelon effect that I was talking about earlier, understanding the qualitative sentiment data around how users are experiencing that overall technology experience. That continues to be a huge element. Automated. So this is another big trend here as well, which is, can I start to automate some of those L1 level help desk tickets that I might be receiving? It might be something very simple like disk space on a device, right? My device is slowing down because it's becoming too full, or a quick automated notification that could say, we know there's an outage from so-and-so cloud provider, just so you're aware, right? And so getting more automation out of these tools should be a key goal of your experience management strategy. And at the end of the day, quantified. You need something that you can track over time. And this goes to that continuous improvement challenge, right? How do I know that I'm getting better over time? And so many of the organizations that provide experience management today, as well as those that are looking to buy those tools, are looking for a quantified way to say, this is what the user experience is like, not this is what the device experience like, this is what the app experience is like, but this is what the user is experiencing. And can I start to track that and quantify that over time, right? So that is one of the end goals that you can use an IT person to get better insight here and be able to track it. But it's also really useful when you have the CFO at the end of the day come and say, why do we have this tool? Well, all of a sudden I could show ROI in that improved experience. So that's why quantified really matters here as well. Over to you, Jason.
Sure. So this is, thank you, Andrew. So this gives me an opportunity to just do a blatant outright pitch of the Exoprise platform as part of this webinar. Really all of the things that Andrew mentioned, Exoprise has either built into its platform or is building. Certainly in 2020, we released more and more of our real user monitoring, but the Exoprise platform is coming together as a, sort of this ultimate digital experience monitoring solution for cloud network and the workspace transformations that companies are going through right now. And we're going to talk more and more about some of these key features and points, but better together, synthetic plus RUM is really one of the things that we have worked to bring to market in 2020. You can deploy pieces of our platform to end user desktops and collect telemetry about their end user experience, but also you can run synthetics from certain synthetics in a lightweight fashion against cloud properties, and that can tell you about problems before the user is really going to be in that application, before that critical Teams meeting that Teams meeting that everybody in the organization needs to join. So we've always had complete coverage for all of Office 365, and as Microsoft shapes and changes it, we continue to add more capabilities and sensors, and we also continue to add real user monitoring for many of these pieces, where we can capture latencies and packet loss on a real-time basis for all of the thick client apps is what we're bringing to market. And at the same time, the platform integrates, 360, what we call sort of a 360-degree view. We integrate service provider feeds from Microsoft, so you can see what they're saying the health of your tenant is, as well as what our synthetics and real user monitoring is across all of your deployment, so that you can compare and contrast. Is there really a problem out there? And even more importantly, when Microsoft says there was a problem and then they fix it, do you know when it's really fixed? And that's one of the big benefits of the Exoprise platform. And out of the box, we have support for more than 50 different apps and different protocols, and we sort of highlight that no scripting is required, and that's because it's important, because you want your digital experience monitoring platform and tools to be easy to deploy. Exoprise is a little different than some of the other EUEM tools and platforms out there. We're not necessarily pushing an all or nothing, like you have to have it deployed to every end user machine, every end user device. You can also deploy very rapidly the Exoprise solution to pockets of users that might be experiencing different network conditions, different Wi-Fi conditions, different ISP conditions, so that you can diagnose for a smaller subset of those users, and you can move the platform around, the real user monitoring Service Watch platform around. We've always had crowdsourced monitoring since the beginning, and that really is a benefit, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. It's really a benefit for cutting the problem in half, like, am I only having the problem? Is it only my tenant, or is it everybody else? And then we've talked a lot about, we've talked a bit today about network visibility, end-to-end visibility, and how some of that was lost when you moved to cloud and SaaS-based applications and remote working. But we, with our real user monitoring and our synthetics, try to get that back to network administrators and NOC operators and operations personnel. So that's really the, what we're trying to do with the Exoprise platform. We've always had the synthetics available, and we've added over this past year Service Watch browser and Service Watch desktop, and we're going to talk more about those in a couple of slides as well.
Thank you, Andrew and Jason. For the next three questions, I'd like to change the speaker order. This question deals with benchmarking network and SaaS performance. So Jason, help our audience understand, how can organizations do so?
Sure. So I just spoke about crowdsourced benchmarks and how it's a key sort of a key component and a key feature of the cloud-ready platform, in that it helps you really understand whether or not your network or your application delivery is up to par with the anonymized aggregate that Exoprise has. And so we we crowdsource almost every element of every one of our diagnostics and metrics that we collect. So you can compare your network round trip times to any customers within our platform, the anonymized aggregate, and you can tell whether or not you need to make improvements to your network latencies, or whether or not your jitter is worse and how that might affect a Teams audio video conference. Same thing for SharePoint health scores or Exchange mail queues and the hygiene. So this is how some of our customers are using it. They're using it to compare and make improvements. They're using it to gather statistics on a longer term basis and bring those back to IT management and say, like, look, we're not as good regionally, and we need to make improvements to whether it's cloud-based proxies, VPNs, SD-WAN, backbone, or even ISPs that our home users are on. We might need to upgrade their Wi-Fi routers. This benchmark capability, this real-time crowdsourced benchmark capability enables IT to make some of those decisions. And also on the next slide, you can see that having these crowdsourced metrics can really help when it comes to outages, outage comparison and detection. So this is an example from, I think, March 15th. So only about a little over a month ago, where the Cloud Ready platform helped customers, detect a Microsoft outage. It was actually, I believe it was an Azure AD outage, up to 40 minutes before Microsoft reported the problem. It also enabled our customers to realize that it wasn't, their networks, it wasn't their VPNs, it wasn't their backend routing. It was really, Microsoft's outage in this particular case. And our screens allowed a customer to see that 40 minutes before and to detect when Microsoft fixed the problem, which I think on this case was a few hours afterwards, and really eliminated a lot of guesswork, finger pointing, reduced the time to you didn't have to get on the phone and talk to Microsoft and try to analyze what the issue was. You knew well ahead that if you had an alternative collaboration, or if you had a different solution, you should go leverage it because there was a real Teams outage. And I think the next slide is back to Andrew.
Yes. So on the benchmarking component, first of all, completely agree with the last couple of slides here. But just to circle back on some of the things that we mentioned earlier, understanding the entire chain of experience delivery, right, is a huge component here. And you see an example here, at the bottom here. And I think this is a really good graphic to kind of show this, that there are multiple different points of failure, right? And you want to understand kind of the benchmark across all of these major areas. The other component is looking at this from a geographic perspective, particularly with a heavy emphasis on cloud. There can be huge differences in geographic, experience for employees, depending on if they're what data center they're closest to and so forth. So that can definitely play a huge role in your benchmarking. The qualitative feedback, I think this is related to the crowdsourcing component of this as well. But, this is idea that I need to sort of verify the outages across multiple different sources here. It continues to be an important part of benchmarking. We are seeing a lot of organizations move towards cloud for experience management so that they can do industry benchmarking too. So, and that could be specific to your cloud apps, but it could just be overall the experience. So let's say you're in a VDI heavy industry. Being able to compare across your industry could be very helpful. Whereas if you're comparing your VDI deployment versus someone's physical deployment, then that maybe is not going to be as useful for you. So using cloud and anonymizing a lot of that data, a lot of the providers have that ability to do that anonymization as well, can really help as far as giving you insights that are more tailored to your specific industry. Pay particular attention to computing delivery models, right? This is another key area. Jason mentioned earlier the increase in VDI deployments. We're seeing the same thing here at Forrester, and they're mostly cloud desktop environments. Some of that is managed by the end user organization with a broker connection. And some of that is full on desktop as a service where the vendor will manage it themselves. But that's going to have a big difference as far as the overall experience. If it's a VDI environment where you're hosting all of the compute, basically through the internet connection versus something that can run more natively without an internet connection as well. So that's another area where we definitely do see a need to provide specific benchmarking here as well. Over to you, Sid.
Thank you, Andrew. So Andrew did mention RUM and synthetic capabilities in one of his earlier slide. This question deals with enterprises seeking the best of both worlds, RUM and synthetics, for their continual success, and dig deeper into it. So I'd like to have Jason speak more on why these both capabilities are going to be important.
Yeah, thanks, Sid. So I'm looking at the time, and I want to make sure we get time to answer questions as well. So I won't blast through these slides, but I will try to cover the salient points. So Cloud Ready and the Exoprise platform has always had synthetics, largely for SaaS, and that's been our specialty. It's really as simple as that. If you're only using real user monitoring, you're only going to know about a problem when it impacts a user. If you're only using synthetic, then you might just miss coverage. And so by combining synthetics plus real user monitoring, you get the best of both worlds. You want to know about problems before they impact your organization. You want to be able to benchmark your apps and network, over historical periods of time. Also, synthetics give you like a real good solid baseline, a monotonic set of metrics, 24/7. You can make a change to your network and you don't have to wait for a user to be impacted or to ask that user if it's gotten better or worse. You can use synthetics to find that out. And on the next slide, you'll see that when it comes to real user monitoring, what we've introduced in 2020 is the ability to get coverage if you have users that are in disparate locations, coverage for your SaaS apps, coverage for your network, coverage for your endpoints, your desktops. So we collect real-time metrics across all these devices, as well as use a browser extension that can be deployed via the Chrome or Microsoft Edge web store to examine a concrete set of URLs and filters that you put in. And we can collect that data and analyze it to make sure that you are not missing, poor experience for pockets of users or poor experience for users that might be in different locations. And on the next slide, just to recap, like why you would use these in different locations or for different use cases. Synthetics are for proactive HQ, centralized synthetic monitoring, any app, any SaaS platform. Whereas Exoprise Service Watch Browser is perfect for troubleshooting network and SaaS applications from a branch office, work from home users, mobile users, no matter where they are. And Service Watch Desktop is really for diagnosing the full set of Wi-Fi signals, ISPs, hop by hop data for every app that they might be using, and for the full set of thick client apps and desktop experience. I think that's back to Andrew. Yeah.
And just quickly to reiterate this too, I mean, we see this as very complementary capabilities, right? The real user, monitoring capabilities can often help with, doing root cause analysis because, there might be things that are outside of, your purview and your testing that you can help find with real user monitoring, faster MTTR overall, and enables that qualitative data ingestion because you have the resident on the end user device. You're looking at this in real time, so you can verify some of those things. And on the synthetic, it's exactly what Jason was mentioning, which is ability to be much more proactive as far as incidents that might crop up. And I would also say that it can aid in that change management, so ahead of time if I'm going to push out a patch or something like that, that I know that this is exactly how it's going to impact the environment, and I can prepare for that in advance or make changes so that those disruptions don't happen. So I'd agree that both of these capabilities are very important.
All right, and to the last question of the day is discussing the best practices that IT leaders should be implementing in order to improve EU/EM? Jason, over to you.
Sure. So, obviously we've been talking about how, working anywhere or work anywhere is going to be, a fact of our lives within IT and within businesses for the foreseeable future, certainly for the next couple of years. And that, having and combining synthetics plus RUM for enterprise apps, legacy apps, SaaS apps is the right strategy for EU/EM and for monitoring the digital experience for your end users. You're going to need to be able to resolve network issues and understand outages that support these flexible work models. Integration is always critical. Integrating other tools like ServiceNow and different logging tools and different monitoring strategies, different network operations center dashboards is critical. So you should look for that from any kind of platform that you are interested in for EU/EM. And the endpoints, the devices, as people move around and deal with these apps, becomes more and more critical. So you need to have good coverage for the entire end user experience, whether it's the SaaS apps, thick client applications that might be more and more leveraging SaaS or cloud, and how everything comes together at that endpoint for end users, so that you can understand their digital experience. Next.
And I showed this slide earlier today, just showing the challenges, right? And this is, again, part of my best practices report on employee tech experience. But there are a number of best practices that we basically have linked in this report to these challenges, right? Around prioritization, organization, tech debt, adoption, continuous improvement. And so, I won't go super in depth into all of these because I do want to leave some time for questions as well. But when it comes to sort of the prioritization components, the big thing is to really make sure that you have a good understanding of where those gaps are from an employee experience perspective. And some of that is going to be from your telemetry data that you've started to collect through an experience management tool. Some of it is going to be through a manual, interviewing, design thinking workshops, journey mapping, right? There's a human element to how do you prioritize this, particularly in the context of what is that user journey and understanding how technology fits within that journey overall. From the organizational perspective, staff goal setting is one of the major components. You saw the data earlier, just over half of folks are actually saying that they're goaled on experience improvement. We are seeing more of a center of excellence approach across organizations to get at that challenge that we were talking about earlier of everybody owns their own technology and they're all in conflict about what creates the best user experience for everybody, right? So having kind of a dedicated leader of experience management in your organization can really help. And having a product mindset approach to this as well. It's not just a shared, IT service. It's think about the experience as a product that you're constantly improving for your employee, your internal customer. From a technical debt perspective, we talk a lot in our report around how to think about migration of legacy applications to the cloud, refactoring them as web browser applications, how to automate mundane processes that maybe take a lot of time, right? So think about technical debt, not just as legacy apps, but also legacy processes, like say device deployments, for instance, and evolving your legacy skill sets too, which can oftentimes hold you back as well. So from a technical debt perspective, there's a lot that you can do, but just don't think about technical debt as a technology thing alone. It's also processes and skill sets. From an adoption perspective, there's a whole host of kind of human-centric processes to put behind adoption of new technology. A lot of it is doing your pre-work to really anticipate any resistance to new technologies, actively marketing that technology as you roll it out to folks. All right. And some of that can actually happen through experience management tools as well. There is kind of capability to go out and say, there are new services available, and then collect that feedback post implementation using these tools as well. And then finally, on the continuous improvement, I mentioned the tech experience score. So I won't go in depth on that, but also think about your security modernization strategy. Oftentimes this can have an impact on the overall experience. Jason mentioned things like CASBs, for instance, which have it's another hoop that the user needs to hop through in order to get to a resource that's really important for them. And continuing on with employee journey mapping, that's when you're really looking at what's the day in the life of the end user. How do they interact with technologies that can really inform your overall monitoring strategy. So if I'm going to leave you with just a couple of key recommendations that you can take just immediately after this, identify some key business processes that need monitoring to guide your purchase decisions. So what are maybe the 4 or 5 most important tasks or applications that employees really need that access to, and build your monitoring strategy, based off of that business, outcome that you're looking to drive. Dedicate specific staff to digital employee experience improvement. Maybe this means, putting together a resume. If you go on LinkedIn, you type in digital employee experience, I guarantee you will find a lot of postings out there of IT teams looking to hire for that particular role. So that can help you as far as building that job description. Develop new metrics in collaboration with the business. Get rid of the ones that no longer serve your business. If you are just looking at on-prem to application performance, but you're moving a lot of that to the cloud, you got to rethink how you think about your overall metrics, basically, and really try to focus on what, at the end of the day, is a successful business outcome from having this monitoring tool in place. So things like employee satisfaction, higher NPS scores, eNPS scores. The goal ultimately is to tie this to higher levels of productivity and retention of talent, which is a very difficult thing to do. But over a long period of time, this experience can build up and enable you to kind of look at the overall impact of technology on your workforce. So that would be my 3 recommendations just to wrap things up here.
Thank you, Andrew and Jason, for that lovely presentation. And now we are ready to take some questions. We've got some close to 10 minutes before we can wrap it up. I see a question here in the chat window, and Jason, this is for you. Half of our workforce continues to work from home today. By summer, more people will start working from the office. Should we invest in synthetics or service watch, or both?
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty easy question and not uncommon from our prospects and customers that we were working with in 2020. They all had the same thing happen to them. They were they might have had Cloud Ready or Exoprise solutions deployed throughout their LAN WAN, and synthetically testing to ensure that the application delivery and the digital experience was healthy. And then once people went remote, they didn't, they might not have had an EUEM strategy, a digital experience strategy in place. And so we, came to market and worked with them on delivering Service Watch, which allows them to, run on user desktops, move synthetics and deploy synthetics for like Teams and SharePoint and Exchange Online around to those user desktops, as well as capture more of the end user experience and be able to compare and contrast it across end users and across different organizations, that anonymized crowd-powered aggregate that we talked about. So, we would recommend at this time and for the foreseeable future to go with both our synthetic platform, Exoprise Synthetics, and our Service Watch platform for real user monitoring. It's, depending upon what you're trying to solve for, is it mostly a, network, a browser problem? Is it largely Salesforce, which doesn't have any thick client applications? You can get by with Service Watch browser and some synthetics in the same case and deploy those through your end users. But if you have, if you have customers that are having problems with Outlook or the Teams client or other thick client applications on their desktop, you can deploy and use Service Watch Desktop. So, both are relatively easy to deploy in pockets where you might have users that are having problems. I think that answers the question.
Thank you. The second question also here is for you, Jason, and I want to go in the order here. How does Exoprise address employee privacy issues with browser and desktop monitoring?
It's a good question. For synthetics, there's never been any personal information, collected or picked up or stored. No PII information, and we operate with some of the largest healthcare and financial services institutions throughout the world, and so they've always deployed that. When it comes to Service Watch, real user monitoring, we've tried to address this in some recent updates to our product, where we can do role-based anonymization of those users, that user data. So for different roles within our product platform, they see, user 1 or user 20 or user 50. They don't actually see who that user is. So we've tried to do some anonymization of that and give role-based access, role-based control as to who can see some of those, the personally identifiable information. And then if you have, if somebody calls up and you have a help desk, they might have to have certain different access so that they can see or search for who the real user is and determine, what kind of problems they might be having on that endpoint in real time on that desktop. But it's configurable, and we've tried to make a privacy feature embedded within the product, because for many of our customers, they came to us for synthetics because they didn't have to deal with personally identifiable information or privacy concerns. They wanted to run synthetics for synthetic user accounts or synthetic service accounts, and they didn't want to have to deal with any kind of privacy concerns. But now that people are remote, working anywhere, they may have had to add some licenses of our Service Watch product, be able to deploy that, and still address those privacy concerns.
This next question is for Andrew, and I was expecting this. How should organizations think about ROI around experience monitoring tools?
It's a great question. So I would say there are short and long-term, benefits as far as ROI, and there's also tangible benefits and what I would call intangible. So short-term and tangible tend to go together. So a tangible benefit would be something that you could automatically see an ROI on, right? Your ability to say, reduce help desk ticket calls, reduce outages and downtime for the employee overall, right? Those are all related to that sort of like traditional SLA, right? And they're very tangible in nature. You can put a number on them. You can map them on a graph and look at them and provide that ROI. And a lot of organizations find that they can get immediate ROI on experience management tools with a lot of those hard metrics right at the beginning, right? Particularly if you are an organization that tends to be very complex, you might have experience issues already. There's a lot of opportunities to really clean house and provide a better environment for your end users. So I would think about that as far as your tangible short-term ROI benefits. The longer benefits are what I would call intangible, right? They tend to be very fuzzy, hard to quantify benefits, but they're really important if you start to think about them. So I would go back to things like employee productivity, employee satisfaction improvements as being intangible benefits that you can measure through things like surveys, but which are a little bit harder to really quantify from a cost perspective. But let me put it this way, which is, technology is about 30% of the overall employee experience, their experience with technology. So, if their experience is bad overall, and technology is driving them towards things like burnout, causing them to be less productive, causing them to look elsewhere, that's going to have huge impacts on your overall business performance over the long period of time. And frankly, it's going to have a bigger impact than some of the hard metrics up front as well. And so start thinking about, that chain between this is the employee technology experience. This is the impact on the overall productivity and overall satisfaction. And then as a result of that, this is my projection on how this impacts the overall business as far as retention, attraction of talent, those types of things as well. That's becoming increasingly common for IT organizations to start to think at that level of business outcomes. So intangible and tangible benefits, I think, need to go both into your ROI model.
Thank you, Andrew. I do see a couple more questions in the chat window. I want to wrap it up soon. The next question is, does Service Watch monitor teams in real time? I think, Jason, this is for you.
Sure. Service Watch Desktop does, in a coming release, monitor the client connections of the Teams client. It monitors and captures latency and packet loss and packet congestion, network congestion from the Teams client in real time. And we will add a hop-by-hop analysis of that. And so the Service Watch Desktop will examine all of the socket connections for all of the Office thick client applications, as well as some others that you'll eventually be able to configure. But for the first release, it will monitor all of the Office 365 thick client applications to examine latencies and congestion. So yes.
Okay. Andrew, this question is for you. Who is going to own experience management going forward, and how is it evolving?
It's a great question. So right now it's owned by a lot of folks, right? If you are an organization that's heavily invested in cloud applications, it's often owned by whoever is the service owner for the applications component, department of your IT organization, right? If you're focusing more on devices, it could be someone from end user computing that's owning that. And so I see them typically as the leaders. Sometimes you have a service desk leader and that's in charge of the digital experience. But what we've been seeing more and more is the rise of digital employee experience teams, that center of excellence that I talked about. And so I think that is a trend that I'm going to be continuing to watch and actually writing some research later on in the year about it, but more of a consolidation so that we can look across all of these different services and say, how is applications impacting endpoint? How is security impacting service desk? With people forgetting their passwords or something like that. So all of that is all really important to consider as part of your experience management. You can't put one service owner in charge of that. So I think it's going to start to be a much more cross-functional, dedicated team as organizations start to build up their experience management tooling even more so.
All right, I think we are almost at the top of the hour here, but I can take one last question, and that's for you, Jason. Can I run Team Synthetics from Service Watch Desktop? I think you kind of covered this earlier, but still want to hear this.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that's the way we brought the Service Watch Desktop product to market. Currently, you can't run Synthetics from Service Watch browser, although that is something that is also on the roadmap to be able to synthetically test, some SaaS applications. But you can run Teams sensors, SharePoint sensors, Exchange Online sensors from Service Watch Desktop, no matter how Service Watch Desktop is installed. You will be able to assign those sensors. And that solves one of the problems, that we've encountered with certain customers. Customers might make a purchase from us and then wait some time before they get virtual machines and all the different locations that they might want to synthetically monitor from. Whereas now with Service Watch Desktop, you can deploy to admin workstations, for IT that are working from home, or people that might be in a branch office if some of those people are coming back into the office soon. And you can, leverage Service Watch Desktop to run Synthetics from real user workstations. The load is very minimal. We're already doing it for quite a number of customers that we had to do it for in 2020. And we've just, as we brought Service Watch Desktop to market, we've just made it easier and formalized the process for enabling that to happen.
All right, thank you, Jason. We did cross the 1 hour time limit here, so I appreciate everyone sticking around. We're ready to wrap up. I want to thank our presenters, Andrew and Jason, for their time. Thank you to everyone, all the audience joining today. I hope that was helpful. And if there are more questions, please reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to email you back with the answers. Keep an eye open today for the recording in the email. Until then, stay safe, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sid.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.